makes most women start a business? Is it passion, money, or freedom? Welcome to Female Founders, the podcast that takes you behind the scene with women who are founders and CEOs to help you start and scale a successful business of your own. I am your host, Nagelia de Ravin. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Female Founders. In this episode, I have the privilege of having Dr. Janet Gottlieb, a recognized expert in professional review, share her insight and experiences with us. She is the co-founder and management partner of Govise, Inc. She has over 2 decades of experience in research, diagnostics, medical devices, and pharmaceuticals, providing critical insight into professional reviews. Good morning, Dr. Janet, and what a great opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I'm grateful to be able to learn more about your work and all the things you are doing, especially when it's come to talking about FDA regulations and all of these things. Like a lot of us, we have no clue what's going on. So I'm grateful to have you with us today.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So can you tell us about your journey and how you become an expert in promotional review?
Sure. So I am a PhD by training, so I technically am a scientist. I think a lot of folks know more about virology than they would care to because of the events of the last 3 or 4 years or so, but my PhD is in molecular virology, so that means I know a lot about viruses, and I know a lot about vaccines and what's been happening. My passion actually is in infectious disease, but I also have another passion, and that's in medical aesthetics. I'm very interested in beauty for all and understanding skin and understanding different ways that we can sort of improve on some of the things that we would like to maybe change about our facial appearance. So I decided after my PhD that I would like to enter into industry and specifically into the aesthetics industry. So I joined Allergan. It's a company that was acquired by AbbVie in 2020. I joined them after I finished my PhD, and I started with them in 2011 in the aesthetics area in an area called medical information in medical affairs. Now, to be clear, I had no idea that this area even existed. So it was honestly a dream job just to be able to respond to customer questions and inquiries about the company's products. Shortly after, within, I would say 3 to 4 months, I started working in what was called promotional review. I knew nothing about promotional review, I'm going to be honest. And so it was a very steep learning curve, but very interesting. And what promotional review was looking at anything that the company deemed to be promotional or advertising in nature. So when you see commercials on TV, for instance, when you go into your doctor's office and you may see sales aids from companies, we looked at materials like that. And I was responsible for reviewing all of the medical and scientific content. And again, I'm telling you, I had no idea what I was getting into. It was totally falling into it by accident, and it was amazing because I loved it. So it was learning on the job. I'll be honest. I started as a senior manager coming in, knowing absolutely nothing about the area and just soaking all of it up. I went to a lot of trainings. I learned from colleagues. A lot of it was on the job training. And I took to it so well that within, I would say, probably a couple of years, our team was formed. I was leading the team, and I grew my team from 4 people to over 20 globally. So I had, within 5 years, a team here on the West Coast, where I'm located. I had a team on the East Coast and as well as in the UK for our outside of the US review products. So it was quite the journey because it was unexpected. I'll be honest. I had no idea of this career path. I knew that I wanted to go into industry. I knew I wanted to go into the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and I knew I wanted to do something that was always a passion of mine, and it was fulfilled in more ways than I could even describe. So I went on that journey. I made my way up, worked up the ranks to executive director. Until I left the company. I left industry in 2022 to co-found Govise, of which now I am a co-founder of a startup that we focus on that passion of medical promotional review.
Oh my goodness. I don't even know where to start. This is a fascinating.
It's a lot.
So
It's
you're
a
just
lot.
like, yeah, it's like, okay, I have no clue what you're talking about, but I'm going to take it anyway and I'm going to learn. That is not a risk most women will take. A lot of
Yeah.
women will say, yeah, no, thank you, because I have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But now, Dr. Janet, let's get a little bit more, because a lot of people, when you're talking about promotional review, they have no clue what you're talking about. They're probably thinking, like, perhaps even some people probably will even think that, okay, she maybe reviewed the company promotional for businesses, for any type of businesses, right? So a lot of things can come in mind for that. So now, can you explain a little bit more, what is it and what exactly is entailed when you're doing that?
Sure, sure. And I get this question a lot, and I love talking about it. I'm sure you'll see my passion, enthusiasm come through.
Yes.
And so I think what is so great is just an overall explanation of what I do and how important it is that it's incredible to be a part of something that touches so many patient lives. I'll be honest, because anything that a company puts out externally or uses materials to train their sales reps. So those are the folks that will go into doctor's office and educate them on our products. Anything that is released externally does go through a very rigorous internal review. And so during that review process, so that means that commercial, you start with commercial developing, let's just say let's go big, something everybody's very familiar with, a commercial that you would see on TV for a product. I think we've all seen those drug ads on TV. And it's always a running joke in terms of, all of the safety information that comes on there. And I know this is definitely, people are always making fun of those ads, but something we've all seen. So let's just say a commercial team, so that's a marketing group at a pharmaceutical company, develops one of those commercials. They put together the script to start with, and they say, okay, I need this now reviewed to ensure that it meets the scrutiny of the FDA, that it meets regulations, it meets local laws regulations, as well as that it's medically and scientifically accurate, right? And that, patients are first and foremost. So commercial will develop the script. They will take it to what's called the steering committee typically. Each company has a different name for this committee. They may call it PRC for Promotional Review Committee, MLR for Medical Legal Review, but it's always a committee. It's a team of people from different departments, typically the legal department, regulatory affairs, whom, by the way, bear the brunt of, I would say, the majority of the risk assessment and owning that risk. And then you have medical. That's me. That's my role. And then you would have compliance as well. And sometimes you would have some folks that come in from other groups. And so everybody is coming with their own perspective, looking out for patients and from their own view. And so these materials would come to this committee. Everybody would review the materials. So it would land in my queue, for instance, in whatever platform I'm using to review materials to look through it. I would look through the script and I would read through it and ensure that any kind of claims that were being made are accurate, balanced, non-misleading, and can be what's called substantiated by the data. So you can't just run a survey, for instance, and say, patients loved it. They thought it was great, right? That's what's called a claim. That's not only a claim, it's an efficacy claim, meaning that survey results, if you tested 5 of your friends and they're like, oh yeah, I love that product, it made me feel great. That's great. And that worked for your friends, but that's not necessarily the right level of substantiation of data evidence that you need to say that claim is accurate. What you actually need are what are called clinical trials. And clinical trials are run in a rigorous way to test hypotheses and to test the efficacy and safety of these particular products. So medical has to dive into clinical data. They have to dive into and be familiar with current literature and scientific paradigms for that particular therapeutic area. So I'm going to pause right there because I know, again, it's a lot. It's very deep, but as an overview, I am the one who ensures I have reviewed commercials, probably you have even seen on television for different companies I've worked for, to ensure that everything that's said in there is can be backed up by data and that patient safety is first and foremost. And I also want to say that this is not to imply that companies are, trying to be deceitful or not putting patients first. Completely the opposite. This is to ensure that there's no misunderstandings, for instance, and that things that are being said actually can be backed up by science and data that's out there, that we're not making claims that could even be misinterpreted as not being true or accurate.
So now that brings me to sometimes when you're watching television, you'll see these commercials and then you'll see they have a patient or sometimes even 2 or 3 patients that's talking on behalf of the company. So now are these patients are real patients or are just actors acting like they took this, but they never really took it before?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Actually, that is something that medical looks for. Regulatory, I would say, as well, and legal. And if you look, there should be very fine print on that commercial that will say actual patient portrayal or actor, and not an actual patient. So it is important to disclose to the public, is this person, are they actively on this drug? Did they take it? Are the results what you're seeing from a real patient, or are they from, it's just an actor just maybe portraying the symptoms that would be described in the particular disease state that's being treated by that product?
They're so small, usually I can't read them.
That's great feedback, because that's also something we look at is the font big enough? Is it on the screen long enough for anybody, an average viewer who's watching TV, to be able to read that? And that's important.
Yes, it is. And sometimes to really read this, you're going to have to go like this to the screen. It's like, forget about it. But that gave me to ask you, Dr. Janet, why is this so important for the people who's going to be on that drug? Why the review so important for them?
So why is the information important for them, or the commercial?
The commercial, yes. I mean, like, why it's so important for you to have to review it to make sure the information come out the proper way to the people who's going to watch it, or the listeners, whoever's going to see it.
Yeah, that's another great question. And I think something we should all be asking ourselves, right? So what it is that when commercial develops these materials, when our marketing group develops these materials, I would say outside of medical, there's probably not another group that knows this data better than anybody else, right? They know this inside and out. Yes. But sometimes they may not understand some of the nuances of the data. Maybe they see something and then misinterpret how it can be used. Medical will ensure that those statistics are being accurately interpreted. They will also look to make sure that it meets the rigorous standards set forth by the FDA and the Office of Prescription and Drug Promotion. Another acronym I'll throw at you, that's OPDP. That is the division of the FDA that's responsible for actually reviewing any pharmaceutical promotional piece in the United States. I want you to think about that for a second. Every single piece, commercial, script, sales aid, internal training aid for sales reps, all of that is sent to this division of the of OPDP, and they are responsible for basically reviewing all of that to ensure that it meets the quality and the stringent standards set forth to ensure that patients and consumers are protected and that they're not misleading claims, and we can avoid public health crises. I think we've seen a lot of excellent examples from the FDA of how they've sort of intervened to ensure that public health is first and foremost. So medical is just ensuring that you can defend the claims that are being made in that commercial, and then quite frankly, that it's true. I think there's always a way of interpreting data, right, in a way that you want. And if you're not trained in that particular discipline or don't understand that therapeutic area, you may be going down a path that's not necessarily accurate and could be misleading. So I would be diving deep into the clinical data. I would be looking for signals, for instance, to say, okay, you probably don't want to have a patient representing in this manner because of what data that we have. For instance, you would want to ensure that your patient population, so that's the patients that are in the clinical trial, are being represented in a way that is a reflective of the clinical trial. So for instance, if you had a clinical trial that was all men, and then you put a commercial about women and how it was effective, you can't do that, right? Because women weren't in the trial. Yeah. And so, and it's like, what? You could argue, but it should be effective in women. It could be, but what if there's something different about the way women metabolize that particular drug, right? And so on the surface, it seems kind of innocuous, right? Like very mild. But when you really dive into it and have to understand those nuances, I think that's when you become an asset to ensuring that those commercials and those promotional materials are accurately reflecting basically that drug's, safety and efficacy profile.
Wow. So, listening to you talking, and one thing that I realized when watching like a commercial, especially when it has to do with medical, like something that always tricked me, they will say that this drug might give you headache or might make you external bleeding. And I'm like, why would you want to put that in a commercial? If you, because I'm not going to use this drug. I'm going to bleed inside and I won't even know it. So is that the reason why they have to put that in there?
Absolutely. What you're hearing when you hear all of it, and many times, commercials, you'll hear the voice, the narrator speak very quickly through some of those side effects, right? That's educating the consumer to say, hey, these side effects, these were observed in the clinical trials. And if they're included as what's typically called the ISI, or the important safety information, so that would be the balance, right? You're going to talk about all these great things the drug can do. That's the efficacy. Now you have to talk about the safety, right? Because everything is a trade-off, right? You have to know is this worth it, right? And you also have to talk to your healthcare provider, right? To tell them, and they could say like, okay, these are some of the side effects. This is what you might experience, but we need to determine, through conversations, if this is going to be the right drug for you. And so you're getting the full picture when you hear that information. Now, I know it sounds so extreme in terms of, and again, that's always just a running joke. But honestly, I love that you even can cite some of those side effects, because one of the other things that we look for when we run, say, commercials on TV or broadcast ads, we typically call them, is when you're running through all of that safety, is it prominent enough? Meaning, can the viewer, an average viewer, would they be able to hear it, understand it, and not be distracted, right, by anything that may be going on in the background? That means that if you're starting to talk about some serious side effects, you shouldn't see people flitting through meadows, right, and dancing with puppies. They should be doing something very neutral so that you can listen and even read on the screen, right, in terms of what some of these side effects may be, so that you understand, because it's not fair and it's very misleading if you were just to talk about the product's efficacy profile and maybe how great it would make you feel, or how it maybe would cure a disease, without understanding like, hey, there's probably some of these other things that may happen, right? We observed these in the clinical trials. This was a very controlled setting. That's why it's so important to talk to your healthcare provider if you see something that you think may be good for whatever particular therapeutic area that you're interested in.
Man, this is so interesting. I seen this commercial on TV, but I never really realized that so much work goes behind it. That's a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now, let's talk a little bit more. Let's get into a bit more about your company. So I know what motivated you to start the company itself, but can you tell us about it and then the services that it offers to companies?
Sure, absolutely. So I do want to say, I think when I talked about my journey, I also did not describe actually one of my dreams, besides becoming a scientist, besides going into industry, was to eventually start my own company. I think when I've had this idea since probably when I was in graduate school, it just wasn't clear what it would be in. It was very intimidating. I think, especially, honestly, let's be candid here, as a woman, right, with no safety net, with no connections to venture capitalists, with no clear idea. There just didn't seem to be a path forward. So that was one of the other reasons I was like, you know what, I'm going to go into industry. I'm going to just see if I can be inspired, right? What's the need? What could be out there? And so then I got my job at Allergan, and I loved it so much that the idea of starting a company, it was always kind of there, but it's like, you know what? It's so good here. Why would I change anything? And so, as I'm sure, especially with what we're seeing in the news and what we're always hearing is that, pharmaceutical companies are no different. They wax and wane in terms of resources, in terms of hiring, in terms of laying people off. It's just the natural course of things, especially when there's mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. And so there's always an issue in terms of understanding, well, what's going to be my backup plan? So when I was in my role as a medical promotional reviewer, I did identify, actually, it was very clear that even in this waxing and waning during the normal course of business, it seemed that while commercial was sort of able to flex in and meet the demands of a business, say during a launch, which is basically when a new campaign is implemented or there is a new indication for a drug or a new drug. It's a very busy time for a company because you are ramping up and you have a lot of resources that you're devoting to this particular campaign, this indication, launching this product. And what we saw is that in commercial, it was easier, I think, to ramp up versus in medical affairs for medical promotional review for multiple reasons. And we found that there wasn't that opportunity to sort of bring in a vendor who could just temporarily step in and cover that, that increase in work, which may just be for a couple of months, maybe just be for a short time. And I'll be honest, it was a little frustrating when I was in that role and I needed somebody to cover, whether it be for vacation, family leave, it could be for launches, and it's very, and when I say it gets crazy during a launch, I'm saying you are locked in a room for probably 10 to 12 hours a day for a week, going through hundreds of materials to get ready, right? And I would say it's even more stressful on the marketing side, right? Because they're probably 24/7, they're working their agencies. But you don't always need resources to work at that, that bandwidth for that amount of time. Yes. And so I would say when I was the hiring manager and I would be looking for vendors, honestly, it was frustrating to see that, oh my gosh, there's nobody I can just tap into. There's no group I can just touch into to say, I just need resources for a couple of months or longer, right? I think just having that flexibility to make sure that medical affairs can appropriately support our commercial partners in these endeavors. And so when my last year in industry, I had my team searching. It was, like we were on the hunt for the unicorn of the vendor who could help us. And honestly, there was just never a good fit. And I think that's when it became very obvious to me, okay, right, I see there's a need here. There's an opportunity. And it's something I'm very, very passionate about. I love medical promotional review. I mean, I'm on the speaker circuit. In some areas, I'm considered a thought leader. I love mentoring people. I love talking about this. I love training people. I've trained, so many people because also there's not a lot of people who have this skill set, right? So there was a lot of opportunity. So that's when we decided to start Govise. My partner and co-founder, Dr. Jimmy Overton, who was also my manager and mentor for 10 years in my role. So I learned so much about being a leader from him. So forever grateful. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate that he gets to be my business partner. Because as you know, your business partner is everything, right? And who you choose to work with. It's a big deal. And also that I'm warned about from multiple people in this area. And so honestly, that's what it was. It's just, we're going to focus on medical promotional review. So that's what Govise does. We are a vendor that specializes in providing medical promotional review services, whether it be ad hoc, team integrated services, long-term, we can step in for, basically turnkey ready just to sit on these steering meetings, get comfortable with the data and immediately weigh in and start to work on these materials. We don't require months to onboard. We don't require, our clients to train our people. We employ our people full-time and part-time, and we provide any training that they may need. But, so much of it is they're just ready to hit the ground running. And we also, culture is important. Culture is everything. And so we also, we implement a culture of transparency. We also encourage our employees to, obviously speak up. We support them, any leadership endeavors, anything we can do, right, for them. And because we want them to be happy, but we don't want them to feel like, well, I'm just a consultant. I'm just a contractor, for these clients. So it's sort of two-pronged. We have, our medical promotional review services, but we're also a firm that is a company that, considers our folks that work for us and work with us to be our team members.
So now, why why did you pick that name? Is there a meaning behind it?
Oh,
The name of the company.
Yeah, that's another fun question. So, well, the Vise is to advise because we do consider ourselves advisors, right? You know, we can come into a company and we're gonna basically tell you, hey, you're running a 35 and a 25 school zone. You know, do you want to do you want to take that chance? Maybe there's an officer across the street who may just wave at you, or maybe saying, hey, there's a bunch of kids crossing the street. You need to slow down. Because promotional review and the guidance that you give, it's not straightforward. And there's a lot of gray areas. And this is also why it's so important to understand the nuances of the data, as well as the regulations, as well as basically what everybody else is doing. The FDA has provided some helpful, amazing guidance, but they can't provide everything down to every detail, right? So that's really up to individual interpretation. So we advise, right? We're going to give our clients guidance in terms of what's probably going to be best for them from a medical promotional review perspective. And then the go is Gottlieb. The G is for Gottlieb. That's my last name. And the O is for Overton. That's my business partner. So that's how we came up with Govise. And the domain was cheap. Let's be honest, right? You have to go with what's available, but it was perfect. And it has a great story behind it as well.
Yes, I love it. I was like, that's unique. It's different. I never heard of it. There has to be something behind it. So now when you decided you're going to take a client in, so do you focus more on the client needs or do you focus more on the consumer need?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. I would say equally both, because you are not going to be able to understand either. You're not going to be able to understand the client needs unless you understand the consumer needs, and vice versa. And the consumer needs are absolutely everything, right? Again, it's always patients first. And so that's great that a client may have a particular goal in mind, but if that doesn't meet the consumer needs, right, and their safety and basically what the market wants, it's a no-go. So it's really important to understand the entire picture. And I think that's one of the things I love about promotional review so much, because it's you have to see it from the larger perspective. You have to understand all of those perspectives when you're looking at this. You can't operate in a silo. And I think for anybody also who's looking for a career in this is a fabulous way to get yourself known across the organization. I heard guidance when I started in this is to say, okay, say you're a rock star in medical affairs, right? Say you're killing it in that area. That's great. You're going to be well known and a rock star in medical affairs. But if you're a rock star in promotional review, the whole company knows you. And it is absolutely true. It's a great way to get visibility, which I think all women leaders and women in their careers need to be thinking about, right? And boy, there is probably nothing scarier than I think telling somebody, you need to just work on visibility. You need to network more. You're like, is there a handbook for this? Like, where is this coming from? I don't know. And so this is where it's important to have not just a mentor, but a champion, right? This is somebody who champions you when you're not around. And that was also some great advice I heard from some women leaders, because I was like, oh, that's true, right? You don't just want someone telling you you're fabulous and this is how to grow. You want them talking about you in a great way when you're not around to champion you for positions. And so I can tell you, it was very intimidating. It's funny. I have employees now who are like, I can't imagine you being intimidated by anything. I'm like, oh, you should have seen me 10 years ago when I had
you have no idea.
You have no idea. So it's just a great way to ease your way into that, and if you're successful in that space, you will rise and you will get visibility. And so it was not unusual for me to be in what we called elevation meetings. So this is when the committee couldn't decide on something and it would elevate to the executive level or maybe even the CEO level. So not unusual, yes, for me to get early morning calls from executives I remember I had to travel a lot in my job. I'd be boarding a plane and I'd be on one of these elevation calls with the chief commercial officer. And of course, I'm going to have time for that. I will ask the plane to wait to take on that. So I think it's it's a great opportunity, but also I think just as a woman leader, it was an easy way, I think, to transition into areas that so often we're told we should do, but there's no way of getting there. No clear path. There's no handbook. And but that was an excellent way, I think, to get that visibility and to get noticed and the opportunity.
Yes, I think the opportunity is big, especially it's something that not everyone knows about also. I never heard of that. I know I see commercial, but I think they just put a commercial. Everybody put commercial. So I didn't think there's anything different behind it. But now, with that said, let's say that someone does have beauty supplies or putting some sort of lipstick or do all these things need to go to the same kind of review as well? Or this are not really that important at all?
Oh, excellent question. You're saying that you don't know much about this, but you actually must be picking up on it because I think you're asking all the right questions. So, when I'm talking about medical promotional review, overall, we are talking about products that are considered to be biologics. So that would maybe be Humira. You would be talking about pharmaceutical products, right? And that would just be drugs that you would normally be used to seeing on commercials. Anything that's considered in that category and is prescription only, that means only a healthcare provider can prescribe it when it's appropriate, when they deem it to be appropriate for their patient. Those materials do have to go to OPD, and they do undergo this rigorous internal review process. Next, you would have medical devices, and medical devices, that's a whole other discussion, but there are some medical devices that the FDA has to approve. And there's other ones that are considered medical devices, but you don't have to send, for instance, floss or mechanical toothbrushes, to the FDA for approval. That's you don't anything that's advertising materials for those particular products. They don't need to go through the review. And so if we sort of even take a step beyond that, because, the medical devices that would require a prescription typically do undergo that process, but it's a little bit different because they're not considered to be pharmaceutical products. And so if we go beyond there, and now we start to talk about things that you could pick up at the drugstore, your local drugstore, for instance. You're talking about your lotions, creams, beauty products, and those would be what's considered over-the-counter or OTC. Yes. Depending on the manufacturer, depending on how it's put forth, typically those do not undergo the same internal review process. It's just going to depend from company to company. Those materials do not have to go to the FDA, much like the prescribed products do. However, the FTC, actually the Federal Trade Commission, does oversee the advertising of those products that are over the counter, especially for the ones that make claims. So if you're making a claim that's going to have an effect on the body, that now travels over into the pharmaceutical realm, and that's where you're going to run aground of getting the FTC's attention for claims you shouldn't be making. So, for instance. And you're gonna look at everything very differently now. But if you're just looking, let's just say in a Vogue magazine, for instance, or you see one of these commercials on TV, and it's for a skincare cream for your under eyes, for your crepiness, let's just say, or crow's feet lines, something that's superficial and minor on the skin, and not superficial, not important, just mean not deep into the skin surface. And you will hear the commercials very carefully. They're very carefully how they craft it. They will say it improves the look of crepiness. It improves the look of crow's feet line. Because now what you're saying is like, hey, we're just saying this may improve it, right? And they may even show some, their clinical data, they'll run and they do run trials. I mean, definitely I'm familiar with those products as well. But they cannot say that this has an effect on the body that will change it and improve those crow's feet lines or that crepiness. They cannot say that. If they start to make a claim that makes it seem as if they're having an effect on the body biologically and changing that, now you've headed over into the space of being what you're an indicated product, and you've caught the FTC and the FDA's attention. Yes, so you have to be very careful in those claims and how you word those things.
So the words play a lot, so be careful what you're putting out there.
Absolutely. Caveats, footnotes, disclaimers, and the words, everything. So important. Very important.
Wow, this is amazing. So now, how do you keep up to date with the latest FDA regulations and warning letters, and what challenge do you face when trying to ensure compliance?
So we, I don't know if everybody is aware or if you're aware, but OPDP, actually the FDA in general, they will send out what are called notice of violations. So you may get warning letters, which require pretty much immediate reaction within a couple of weeks. And you have to actually tell the FDA what you're going to do to fix the errors that they have pointed out, the violations they pointed out. And then you have untitled letters as well. Those are more of a, hey, this is a heads up. We've noticed this has been going on and you need to fix it. So we use those letters there's a good, I'm trying to think how many years it goes back, but there's a long history of the letters, and that gives you very clear insight into what the FDA and specifically the Office of Prescription and Drug Promotion, what they're thinking and how they're seeing these materials. So it's really important that you know your history, right? Otherwise, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. And so you will see different companies called out, and I would say some are more egregious than others, right? And I think it's just a learning opportunity for everybody. And honestly, especially when you go back to these letters like 10 years, I think it's just companies just didn't know. And so now we all know, right? So we're looking for notice of violations. You're going to look into cases that the Department of Justice would be investigating, for instance, right? And so that's really the legal side of it. And, really the government will get involved if there is any kind of implications of, kickbacks, right, to doctors to ensure that companies are not paying doctors to basically, promote their drugs. Because that should not be the case. We should not have pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies should not have undue influence over prescribers, right? That's up to the prescriber. You can educate the prescriber, but you can't influence them to prescribe these products, right? Because they have to do what's best for their patients. Yes. So you would be looking at cases like that. And that's, honestly, that's where it really gets scary because you will see sometimes multi-billion-dollar fines for organizations if there is evidence that there is kickbacks to doctors, if there's evidence that there is what's called off-label promotion. So this is another thing that we look for. You have your drug is indicated for a particular purpose, and that indication is very specific. And the reason you can get that indication is because that's what you specifically studied in your clinical trials. This is the evidence that the FDA has reviewed, and they're approving that indication for that drug based on that data. Now, many drugs have what's called off-label. So on-label would be following the indication and the data in the product information. You would have off-label, meaning, hey, we noticed that actually it improves this other disease state as well. So doctors and healthcare providers, they can determine, I want to use this drug off-label for this patient. I have deemed it to be appropriate for this particular patient. Companies obviously are going to pick up on that, and they may even see signals in their clinical trials, right? You may see side effects that are actually beneficial. That is not unusual. I think we can see even some of these type 2 diabetes drugs, right, that have recently gotten approval for weight loss because that's what you're noticing during the clinical trials for type 2 diabetes. So the company cannot promote off-label. That's a huge no-no. That because they do not have the data to support that this is safe and effective in this particular patient population that they're targeting. So that means that you can only stick to what you have been approved for. If the company is asked the question, they do have a specific department for those kind of questions, and that's in a controlled environment, regulated by the FDA. But doctors can do that. They can prescribe off-label. Companies can't. So that's another big one when companies are found guilty of off-label promotion of their drugs, multi-billion-dollar fines. So we look at those cases too, because it's more often than not, it's not that the company is out there like, absolutely, let's use this off-label. It could be in a way that the materials are presented, right? So that's another thing we're looking at is like, if I'm looking at a particular promotional piece, an advertisement, does it seem like we're promoting off-label? Are we maybe showing patients in the commercial that aren't, part of the patient population for this indication, but might be affected by the drug in a positive way? So we're looking for that as well. So also, FDA has multiple guidance documents. So we look through there and we use that to, guide us on our basics. We will look to see what other companies are doing in the space. And also importantly is that we talk within our network. This is another way that we have an idea keeping up to date. So there's multiple congresses and conferences for promotional review, mostly regulatory. That's something, we want to change. I think that was another frustrating aspect in my prior role was that we had so many of these conferences that would focus on the regulatory components. And it's very useful, don't get me wrong, but I felt like there was really nothing for medical, like just for that perspective. And so that's also something, that we have on the horizon in terms of elevating the function of medical promotional review and making that its own, role and function and responsibility. So it's really multi-pronged in terms of how we stay current. And this is why it's so important, honestly, to be in the trenches, to use a metaphor there, because you have to know what people are doing, what the current thought is, and honestly, where the risk tolerance is, right? And this is also where we advise. We may say, hey, we know there's no FDA guidance on what you want to do, right? We know that there's no examples for that. But based on what we know and the current thoughts, it's true. Like, this is not an unusual conversation to have, especially with the growth of social media and social media platforms, right? There was no governance in terms of the FDA said, well, this is absolutely what you can do, right? No. When those platforms came out, that was new territory for these companies. And they really relied internally to understand, how can I be compliant in these spaces? And so that's another thing. So much of this is that you need the experience, you need advice and guidance and perspective from those that are not only in the trenches, like I said, but out there staying current and abreast of any new development that may be happening, whether it be an investigation, a fine related to promotion, notice of violation letters, untitled letters, warning letters, and, maybe, some risks that other companies are taking, and to see, maybe what some of the repercussions were or benefits were for that.
So pretty much companies really, really need a service like yours. It's not just, especially the advising part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now when you go in, let's say that you get a new client. So for how long do you have to stay in with that client?
Well, we hope a long time, but I think it just depends on their needs. So, our clients right now, I would say we have from startup, meaning that they are just getting their process and everything off the ground, right? They're still looking for approval to very, very established. And, their model is to work with vendors like Govise. And, everything is just, we just sort of propped our person in there, ready to go. And then they just hit the ground running. So it just depends. As I mentioned earlier, we tout ourselves also as a flexible solution. So it could be sometimes we just may be tagged in, when they have launch. But, launch products, it's and again, I'm not jesting when I say we spend a good week, locked in a room for 10 to 12 hours a day when there's a launch. But there's a lot of work that goes up months leading up until that approval date, because you have to be ready with the training materials. You have to be ready with all those materials that can be reviewed very quickly, depending on, feedback from the FDA. And so our clients right now, the majority of them are bringing us on a good 6 to 9 months before they expect product approval, so that we understand the data, so that we can sit in and then we could review the materials very efficiently. And I would say, and I think some of our clients, they expect maybe after some of these approvals that they would maybe just have the work now and shift that to internal resources. But I can tell you from experience, if I had a good vendor come on, and I worked with vendors, kind of limping along in my formal role with whomever I could get. I kept them. If they were good, if that particular contractor was good, I kept them in that role. And so we predict that's probably what will hopefully happen, because we're not only just sort of sitting on the sidelines advising, we do integrate ourselves. We're part of the team. And we pride ourselves also on, a strong solutions oriented culture, right? We want to come in, we want to understand, but we want to build relationships and those bridges, because, as I mentioned, there's so many different people and perspectives. It can get contentious. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It can get very contentious. So it requires, I think, a very firm, strong constitution to be in this role. So not only do you have to know the data, not only do you have to know the regulations, not only do you have to understand the environment, you have to know how to talk to people, and you have to know how to speak up. You have to know how to be firm. And so, it's funny because in this, as I'm describing this, that it seems that the easiest thing to do is just to say, no, you can't do this, right? Just stick with this. But no one likes that. I don't know about you. I do not like being told no when I have my heart set on something, right? So,
yes.
yeah, I remember this negotiation training that I attended, and it sticks with me. And I always give this guidance to my team is to say, give them what they want on your terms. So what that means to me, how I interpret that is there's always a path forward. There's always a compliant path forward that everybody hopefully should be able to agree on. But if you do not understand where that other person is coming from, you're not going to get there, right? You can't just go into these meetings and just be like, well, this is how you have to do it. Nobody likes that. Yeah, your defensive walls go up, and it's so hard to get past that versus to say, I really, and it's true. I mean, because I don't know what I don't know. And I go in and I seek to understand before being understood. So I will go in there and I will ask questions. I will be curious. And I'd like to better understand, hey, what is it that you're trying to do here? What led you to this particular claim, right? Can you help me to understand how we got here? And I listen. I'm not just, I'm not just sitting there not listening, right? I'm actively listening, taking in what they're saying. And I can tell you 99% of the time, I had no idea going into that's where they were coming from. It's like, oh, okay, that's what you mean. All right. So that totally makes sense. Now we can talk about a path forward. And so there's a lot of soft skills. And I know that's not people's favorite terms, but it's true, right? I find I've done a lot of these meetings where not only have I spoken, but I do a lot of training. And the feedback I get overwhelmingly is that folks just don't have enough training in that negotiation, soft skills. Sometimes, we even have data that shows that there's not all organizations have formal training for their medical promotional reviewers, right? Because sometimes it's simply a component of their job, not all that they focus on, right? So it's not given, that full attention. And so, that's another thing that we emphasize is that, and our employees that, we emphasize with them, it's like, you have to be comfortable in this environment. We will get you to a point where you're comfortable. You have to be able to read the room, and you have to know how to communicate, right? And sometimes, I mean, it's not all, like I said, puppies and rainbows and roses, it's tough decisions, and it can be intimidating, but, I think as long as you're building relationships with those folks, business is business, right? I mean, I have been in so many steering meetings where it got so heated. And then afterwards, the meeting's over. We take care of it. We're talking about our kids, our dogs, whatever, our vacation, and having lunch with them later that day. So, and I've loved all the people I've worked with. I mean, it has been so rewarding. And I think that, even if a relationship seems tough, all you need is time and patience. I think you can get around any of that. I think if you're going to show yourself to be a solutions-oriented, willing partner who's open, it's going to lead to success. And that's been my experience.
And that's a great advice. And also, like you say, communication is the key. So you have to be able to communicate. So now how can people get in contact with you and Govise?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So they can visit our website, www.govise.com. You can learn more about our services and our company there. I also am happy to take any inquiries or questions or anything. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. You can like our page. I'll shamelessly promote our LinkedIn page as well. You can find a lot of really good information on our website as well as LinkedIn. And if you want to contact me directly, you can actually reach out to me at hello@govise.com.
Oh my goodness, I was not expecting this conversation to be so, how do I say that, valuable insight. And I learned a lot that I didn't know about the industry. Even when I was searching it, I was still like, oh my goodness, this is cool. But listening to you talking, explaining it, I think it's a great thing because it's keeping the patient, it's keeping us out there in mind that to be protected, because I know some companies have us in heart, but some of them maybe they don't, or maybe they just make the mistakes as well. So it's good to know that there's people out there that's just gonna go in and make that review and make sure that whatever they're saying, it's not gonna come out, well, yeah, let's me go do this, but in reality you don't know what you're putting yourself into. So I appreciate your feedback, and then also creating Govise. It's different, it's unique, and then that's something that perhaps other women can follow your footstep and get to that industry as well.
Oh, it warms my heart to say that you learned about this and found it valuable. Because again, this is, Govise is my baby, and I'm so passionate about this area. I love it, and absolutely. And I would say, anyone listening to this that is just looking to even learn more about a career, reach out to me. Or if you just want to know more, you have, learn more, have feedback. Want to get feedback on something, so happy, because mentoring, I think, is also a very important part of leadership, and I'm more than happy to help and to mentor and champion whenever I can.
Thank you for listening to Female Founders Podcast. That's it for this week's episode. Be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app or connect with us on womel.com so that you don't miss our next episode. See you next time. Bye for now.